Every summer vacation, for as long as I can remember, my mother would send me to my uncle's cabin in the countryside. She said it was a good way for me to get fresh air and take a break from the city. I never complained. My uncle was one of the most fascinating people I knew. He lived alone, without electricity or neighbors, and had a dog named Argo, who seemed to be his only companion. The cabin was nestled deep in a dense forest. It was surrounded by trees so tall that the sky almost disappeared. As a child, that place felt magical. My uncle had a habit of drawing. He wasn't a professional artist, but his illustrations were detailed and sometimes a bit strange. He said drawing helped him organize his thoughts. When I was about 9 years old, I found one of his sketchbooks hidden in a closet. It was nothing like the drawings he usually showed me. Inside were creatures with deformed bodies, enormous eyes, and elongated limbs. On one page, there was what appeared to be a man, but his shadow projected the figure of a monstrous creature full of teeth. I remember showing him the sketches, expecting an explanation. He just snatched the notebook from my hands without saying a word, his face filled with panic, as if I shouldn't have seen it at all. He locked the notebook away in a chest in the corner of the room, one I had never seen opened before. The sound of the latch closing echoed through the cabin. After that, he changed completely. He spent the rest of the day in silence, staring into the distance while absently petting Argo. When I tried to ask him about the drawings, he just shook his head, as if wanting to bury the subject entirely. During the following visits, I noticed something had changed in him. He was still kind, but there was a caution about him that hadn't been there before. He avoided going outside after sunset, and was always watching the windows, as if expecting to see something out there. Once, I caught him lighting candles around the chest, murmuring words I couldn't understand. When I asked what he was doing, he simply said, "It's for protection." Years passed, and the incident with the sketchbook became just a memory, a curiosity rather than a real reason for concern. But last year, everything changed. I was 18 and excited to spend another summer with him. It had been months since I'd last seen him, and he seemed enthusiastic in his letters, mentioning new trails to explore and even plans to renovate the cabin. However, when I arrived, something felt off. He was thin, with deep circles under his eyes and an exhausted expression. The cabin, which always smelled of fresh wood and herbs, now reeked of mold and something metallic, like blood. He tried to act like everything was normal, but his hands trembled as he prepared dinner. That night, I heard heavy footsteps outside the cabin. I thought it might be Argo, but he was lying at the foot of the bed, growling softly. When I looked out the window, I saw nothing, only the pitch-black darkness of the forest. But the sound continued, like something big moving among the trees. The next day, I found my uncle sitting at the table with the same notebook I had seen years ago. The pages were spread out, covered in new drawings. The creatures were even more grotesque, with details so precise they almost seemed real. There were notes beside each one, written hastily and nearly illegible. One of them read, "They are coming. The circle won't hold them for long." When he noticed I was looking, he slammed the notebook shut and stared at me with an expression that was equal parts fear and warning. "You need to leave," he said, his voice firm but trembling. Something was clearly wrong, and I wanted to help him, but he didn't give me a choice. He practically pushed me into the car and stood in the middle of the road, watching as I drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see his silhouette, motionless like a statue, until it disappeared completely around the curve. For days, I felt uneasy. I tried calling him several times, but the calls went unanswered. The letters I sent never received a reply. Something inside me told me I should go back, but life consumed me. College, work, responsibilities. Time passed, and my memory of that summer began to feel like a bad dream. However, something drew me back to that cabin. Maybe it was guilt for not insisting on helping him, or maybe it was curiosity about what was really going on. One winter morning, I gathered my courage, filled the car's gas tank, and drove there. When I arrived, I barely recognized the place. The trees surrounding the cabin were dead, their leaves reduced to dust. The ground, once covered with a carpet of green moss and wildlife, was cracked and dry, as if the earth had been drained by something malevolent. The cabin, which used to feel cozy, looked on the verge of collapse, with rotting boards and broken windows. But what struck me the most was the silence. There were no sounds of birds, insects, or even the wind. It was a silence so absolute that it made my ears ring. I pushed open the cabin door, which creaked loudly, echoing like a scream in the emptiness. Inside, it was covered in dust and cobwebs. The metallic smell, once subtle, was now almost suffocating. On the table lay a single notebook. I recognized it immediately. It was the same one he had hidden from me years ago. Trembling, I opened the first page. There were drawings, dozens of them, covering every inch of the paper. They were even more detailed, almost obsessive, with grotesque creatures of twisted bodies and empty eyes. Some pages had brown stains, which I preferred to believe were coffee, though deep down I knew they were in. My decision was to seek help from the police, the military, anyone who could assist me. I knew what had happened. That creature had taken him. The creature he had always drawn. I made up my mind to find help. I couldn't ignore what I had seen or pretend nothing was happening. I grabbed the notebook and drove as fast as I could to the nearest police station. When I got there, I went straight to the front desk, trembling as I tried to explain everything that had happened. The officers looked at me skeptically, but when I showed them the notebook, something changed. One of the officers, a burly, middle-aged man, flipped through the pages slowly. His eyes widened with each drawing, but he said nothing. He simply called over two other colleagues and whispered to them, as if not wanting me to hear. Shortly after, they decided to assemble a team to investigate the cabin. "Stay here," the older officer ordered. "We'll check the area. If we find anything, we'll contact you." I waited at the station, but the hours dragged on without any news. Anxiety consumed me. I had tried calling the emergency number, but no one answered. The next morning, I realized something was wrong. I grabbed the notebook, which had been with me the whole time, and when I opened it again, I nearly fainted. New drawings had appeared. They weren't there before. I recognized each of the officers who had gone to the cabin. Their faces were twisted into expressions of pain and fear, their bodies grotesquely disfigured, as if something had ripped them apart and reshaped them. It was impossible. The notebook had been with me the entire time. How could those drawings have appeared? My mind spiraled into chaos. I ran back to the station, but it was deserted. There was no sign of anyone. It was as if the officers had never been there. The lights were off, and the furniture was covered in dust. It was as if the place had been abandoned for years. I got back in my car and drove to the cabin, desperate for answers. But when I arrived, everything was worse. The trees were even more twisted, their branches resembling hands reaching out to grab me. I entered the cabin and sat in the same chair my uncle used to sit in. With trembling hands, I picked up the notebook and kept flipping, page after page. The disfigured figures continued, but something at the end made me freeze. It was a drawing of my uncle, but he looked different. His eyes were hollow, and his body was distorted as if he was transforming into something inhuman. Beneath the image, there was a single phrase. He tried to stop me. My breathing grew heavy. I turned to the final page, and there I was. My face, my body, but something was wrong. My expression was one of pure terror. My body twisted unnaturally, and in my eyes was the same darkness that filled all the other victims. At that moment, I understood the truth. It wasn't my uncle drawing the pictures. It was the creature. And on the final page, I realized it had drawn me. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.